It started with the official stuff. So the Trump administration is now claiming that the coronavirus came from a Chinese lab and China is pushing back. There appears to be no evidence for this, but they're claiming there's secret evidence they won't tell us. Gavin Newsom says he's going to open businesses in California on Friday to some extent, but not restaurants, just a few other kinds of businesses. So we'll see how that works out. Many US states are opening, and so the scientists that model these things have decided to revise their models, and they basically doubled the number of people they expect to die for that reason. So they're expecting it to get up to something like 3,000 people per day dying. We'll see how that goes, but certainly opening up the states will lead to more deaths, especially in the absence of testing and contact tracing, which we do not have anything like enough of. Although California might. Gavin Newsom actually has a plan to hire up to 20,000 people in California to do contact tracing, and there now are tests pretty easily available in California. But the rest of the nation is just opening without those things because they just don't care. Anyway, so here's someone that wrote an article at the OSCP. The students in the pen testing class should probably check this out. The OSCP is the most important certification to get if you're a pen tester, and it is famously difficult. Many people fail, and here's a person explaining what happened to them. The love bug was the first really famous computer virus that spread through Microsoft Office applications, and 20 years after it happened, the person who wrote it from the Manila has now explained what he was doing, and apparently it stole passwords, which I never knew. I knew it did format your hard drive and destroy your machine, but apparently before it does that, it steals your passwords, and he says that was his goal. He wanted to steal some passwords so he could get free internet service, and he only thought it would affect people near him, didn't think it would spread around the whole world, which is what it did. So YouTube and Google have been greatly criticized for strongly promoting radical alt-right extremism, and they have been afraid that they would be censored by the US government, so they've been attempting to give the appearance of removing controversial content lately, but now they seem to have completely reversed that because PewDiePie has always been the #1 character on YouTube. He is an alt-right, radical, racist figure, and extremely the #1 most popular channel on YouTube, and now they've made a formal deal with him. So they do seem to have decided that pushing racism is worth enough money that it's worth putting up with the consequences, which is probably a logical decision if the only thing that matters to you is money, because I think it is certainly true that in this time of the coronavirus, nobody in Washington has any energy to punish them for being politically incorrect. If Elizabeth Warren were to get in as the vice president, then they might be sorry they'd done that. But if they think Trump is going to get in, then they certainly have smooth sailing ahead for quite a while doing that. And the British have ignored the recommendations of Google and Apple, and they're deploying a coronavirus tracing app that sends all the data to a central server where the government knows who you are. And now they have explained that they are going to keep the data even after the crisis ends. So this is just the kind of government spying that makes people nervous. We'll see if the Brits put up with that. The British are the most surveilled nation on earth. In studies I've seen, with the most pictures taken of you every day and your conversations recorded, #2 is the US, but I think Brit is the #1, at least in something I saw a few years ago. Uber is going to require drivers and riders to wear face covering. In the absence of any federal guidelines, the companies can make their own rules, and that's going to be Uber's rules. So we'll see how that goes. Trump gave a statement at while posing in front of the statue of Abraham Lincoln, and he said that here is his tweet, "We have great testing capacity. We performed 6.5 million tests, which is more than every country in the world combined." I didn't think that is true. And this person, Brian Klass, says it is fantastically false. The total is 31.5 million in the rest of the world and only 6 here. And I went and found an online database where you can download the data. And here's the top 10 countries or so. And as you can see, Russia has 4 million and Spain and Italy have 2 million. So right there, that's enough to be more than our 6 or 7 million. And if you get the actual data and add it up in a spreadsheet, just the top 20 got me to 19 million. So it's, again, as we've gotten used to, Trump is just completely lying. There used to be a time when the United States president was considered an authoritative figure in the world, but now we are just a laughingstock in the world. Everyone knows that we just lie and nobody cares. Anyway, so we're up to time for the class, so I'll skip the rest of these and go to the official class stuff, which is here. So we're here at 125. We're nearly at the end of the semester, and I sent out an email today to try to remind everybody that you're running out of time to do anything. So this is May 4th. The last class is next week. Presentations are due today and papers next week, and then the final exam after that. So there's not much time left. You can check your point totals in Canvas, and you can see the way it turns into a grade, and you should be able to see where you're going. You can still withdraw from the class until Friday if you feel you need to do that. Anyway, how many people want to give a talk today? One person told me they had a pre-recorded talk. When I got through, that was Ampero, so I got that. Does anybody else want to give a presentation today? Just send me, Dante, okay, good. Yeah, send me a chat if you do. So Dante, all right. And I'll make a note here on presentations. All right, only 2 so far. We'll see if any more appear, but that's, I have no problem doing 2. All right, so let's get on to the official slides. All right, so this is security operations. All right. And so administrative security, these are common principles, familiar probably from Security Plus. I say everything in CISSP, a lot of it's been covered in Security Plus and other classes, although not some of the management concepts. So you have least privilege, which means people should only be allowed to have the privileges they need to have. They shouldn't have administrative access on their machine if they don't need it. You should have need to know, which is a horizontal control. So you even if you are cleared vertically to like secret or top secret, you may not have a need to know areas, type information that is not relevant to your area of concern. So those are the vertical and horizontal controls. And separation of duties means that you cannot do something critical alone. You have to have 2 people work together. Basically, one person does the work, and if somebody reviews the work and makes sure it's appropriate before it takes effect. At the financial companies I worked at, this was how it was when you distributed pay. You could not print any checks without preparing the payroll and then having it verified by a second administrator before it went out. This prevents errors by one person, and it prevents crime by one person. You can only get away with a crime by having 2 people collude, and that hopefully lowers the chance of it happening, although the chance is not 0. Rotation of duties and job rotation is where you move people from one job to another. This prevents people from developing some system of concealing inappropriate or fraudulent activity because pretty soon they move on to another job and somebody else examines the books and sees what they've been doing. Mandatory leave and forced vacation is similar, where you must take your vacation and somebody else must do your job for a while. So if you've been doing something fishy, they will probably see that. Non-disclosure agreements are standard in the whole security business. You learn confidential information. You are legally required to keep quiet about it. And you should do background checks of your employees before you hire them. You should at least find out if they really had the jobs they claim to have before, if they really had the education they claim to have before, and if they got fired for cause at a previous job. An incredible number of people don't verify these, to where something like 75% of all resumes now contain complete lies. And there are many, many scandals of people at the top of the San Francisco Hospital Authority and a CEO of Yahoo and many other people holding jobs. And it comes out years later that they lied totally and don't have the degrees they claim to have. Those degrees don't exist, things like that. It is, even the most cursory background check seems to be something many companies don't bother to do. Then you have to monitor your high privilege users. Your administrators have the right to create accounts, elevate people, install software, and you have to have some auditing to see what they've been doing, or they can just get away with anything for a very long time. Then there's the general field of forensics, which is trying to reconstruct what happened when something bad has happened, a violation of security policy, fraud, a data breach, that sort of thing. So first you try to preserve the evidence and collect it somewhere. Criminals can perform anti-forensics. The simplest kind is just deleting logs, but they usually call it anti-forensics if you do something nastier, like hide your tracks or put malicious files that will crash your forensic tools. So the first thing you do is identify the evidence, then you acquire it, making a copy of it so you can't lose it. Then you analyze the copy, and then you create a report, reporting what you found. So media analysis, the most common type for incident response is live capture. You have to get from a running system, the RAM as well as the hard drive, because what really matters is running processes, things like malware that are running, or perhaps remote access tools that a bad guy is currently using to control the system. Then you make images of the hard drive and other storage media, and you try to make complete images of them, including the deleted files where possible. So there's 4 kinds of files on a disk. There's allocated space, which is files that are in use called active data that have a file name and a creation date and an owner and are currently in use. And then there's the deleted files, which are the leftover data on the disk that has been deleted but hasn't been overwritten yet. Then there's a little bit of slack space left at the end of files or left over from previous files that filled the block more fully. And there might be bad blocks, which have been marked defective but still have some data with some errors in it. These are places where you might find evidence. In order to get that evidence, you have to have a binary backup backing up the entire volume. You can do this with the Linux command dd. You can do it with Norton Ghost, FTK Imager, Ncase. Many tools are available for this. All right. So network forensics is when you look at network traffic the same way and record it and try to discover evidence of bad things happening on the network. It's essentially the same thing as network intrusion detection, which tries to automatically detect bad things, but network forensics is usually done not by an automated system, but by a human to be a more detailed analysis. So you can reconstruct emails and files and other things out of the network traffic. So when you have a file to analyze, you can use forensic tools to make it easier and reconstruct normal things. And you can also reverse engineer the malware. You get a file, you're not sure what it is, you think it's malicious, you run it through an antivirus engine and it's not a known virus. So then you use disassemblers and dynamic analysis and the other techniques that we talk about in the malware analysis course to decide for yourself what it does. Embedded devices are the same. Things like phones, routers, and so on, they have their firmware and you can image that and have data on them also. So there's a related area of forensics is e-discovery. E-discovery is producing evidence in response to a discovery request for a lawsuit. So somebody sues you, like Sun says, you have been using Java in a way that exceeds your license. So now you have to give you are required to hand over all emails and product designs having to do with your use of Java for the last 7 years. So you have to find all that stuff, and it's very similar to any other forensic task, digging through piles of computer records to find certain items. Incident response is a big deal these days because everybody's getting hacked, and you have to have a plan to respond. So there's a couple of examples of the steps. You prepare for incident response, then you detect and declare an incident, then you decide you have a response. So the first thing you do is contain the outbreak so that the damage will stop increasing, like putting out the fire. Then you try to remove all the malware infections and all the remote control that the bad guys have. Then you commit a report on what you've done, what you found out about who attacked you and why, and what makes you think you understand how you got rid of them. Then you recover to get systems back to working again, and you remediate to fix the holes so they can't come back with the same technique. And then you have a post-mortem where you analyze everything that happened here and try to improve your incident response for next time, because it's very difficult and it keeps changing, and most companies take many years to develop any maturity in the field of incident response. So preparation is having policies and procedures, staff that's trained, and appropriate software and hardware. There's a checklist for incident handling where you have to determine whether an incident has occurred, determine what your high priority and low priority items are, then acquire the evidence, contain the incident, eradicate the incident, recover, and then prepare a report and have a follow-up meeting. So detection is where you're trying to decide if a security incident has taken place. There are always a lot of things that happen that are not really security incidents. Failures, people can't log in, errors made by your staff, and other things. You have to decide what is really a security incident. Then you contain it to prevent further damage. Typically, you take down servers, you put up a page telling your customers we're having to take the servers down for maintenance or something. Then you examine everything. And this, of course, begins to harm your business, so you have to have management approval for it. Then you have eradication. You have to find the cause of the incident. You have to perform root cause analysis. How did they get in, and what was the vulnerability that let them in? Then you have to have a report. You're going to have a technical report with the technical details of the evidence you acquired and how you analyzed it. And then you're going to have a non-technical report on front, which is what the non-technical people and the upper management are going to read, who don't care about the details. They want to know the basic story. Who came in? What damage did they do? How did you get rid of them? What confidence do we have that they will prevent future attacks in the future? What do we have to do to improve the systems? How much will that cost? When will it be finished? These are the things they want to hear, and they don't really care about all the complicated printouts of binary data that you use to achieve that. So then you have to restore your systems to operation, clean everything up, reinstall the operating systems, do whatever you have to do to make things work, and then remediation. So this was probably things like changing passwords, switching to two-factor authentication, updating systems, that sort of thing. And then lessons learned. This is the only way you get more secure, really, is to improve your response, improve your posture, consider better training, better preparation, more defensive measures, and whatever else you have to do. All right, and root cause analysis we've mentioned. If you don't ever figure out exactly how the incident happened, then you're not going to be able to prevent it from just happening again if you don't find and fix the vulnerability that let people in. So I've got some hoots about this, and I see we got another presenter, Jillian. That's good. So here, this is 7A. All right. I'll make a note here. Jillian's on. G. Lang. Okay. All right. See how many we've got. Well, 6 is pretty good. I'll give it about 5 seconds to see if we get more. All right. So, gathering evidence for a lawsuit. That's e-discovery. All right, compartmentalization. Okay, that's need to know, not separation of duties, but need to know. Which control requires you to keep secrets? That's a non-disclosure agreement. All right, how about writing IR policies? That's of course preparation. All right. Which one needs a non-technical explanation? Okay, that's part of a report. And which one includes submitting a final report to management? Part of the postmortem, apparently. All right, you have some reports, but apparently the final report is after the postmortem, probably because it includes areas for further improvement. All right, and so I've got CDH, I assume that's initials. Dude man will have to tell me who he is. And Phil, sounds like a real name. All right, so Dude man, I thought so, okay. Okay, so I know who Dude man is, all right. Good. Let's go back to here. And, all right, so preventive detective controls. IDS is a detective control that determines if bad things are coming in on the network, and IPS is the same thing, except it also prevents it by adjusting firewall rules and so on. And I see the note of who CDH is. Good. It is like close enough, like I thought. Let me make a note of that. All right. And so you can have a network-based IDS, which is like a router monitoring a whole network, or you can have a host-based one like Tripwire that lives on one machine and only protects that one machine. So you can have a network intrusion detection system, which just gets an extra copy of all the network traffic that's passing through the firewall going into the network, and then logs it or sends alerts, but it can't prevent anything. An intrusion prevention system has to be in line, so when it decides something is malicious, it can then block it. All right, so the most common type is pattern matching, just like antivirus. The simplest thing is to just look through a list of known bad patterns. Protocol behavior tries to notice incorrect patterns of traffic, like incorrect handshakes. And then there's anomaly detection, which has a measurement of what your normal traffic is and reports or blocks traffic that varies too much from the normal baseline. Then there's SIEM systems, SIEM, which correlate all your log and other event data from many sources and continuously monitor to see if you're, and make it possible to do analysis. Continuous monitoring is now recommended of systems to make sure that they call it continuous compliance monitoring, to make sure that things are not, your policy is not being violated. It used to be that you just scan your network once every few years. Now it's recommended that you continuously monitor it. One of my students in my hacking class told me that he went to work and tried to do his homework at work, and he worked at a bank. And as soon as he downloaded hacking tools, immediately the phone rings and they say, all right, kid, what are you doing down there? Knock it off. So that's continuous monitoring. That's what you should be doing, noticing if something bad is happening on your network. Data loss prevention is watching the outgoing traffic to make sure your secrets are not being stolen. Endpoint security are suites like it used to be just antivirus. Now it's got a lot more controls to protect the endpoint devices, which are, of course, the main point you get infected, because that's where people surf the web and read emails and click on attachments and download things, and that's usually where you get the first infection. So antivirus mostly uses signature detection. It's it does have some ability to use heuristic scanning, but it's usually not very effective. And one new technique is whitelisting, where you only allow known good software to run. That's what F-Secure does by default. That is much safer, but it turns out to be very annoying because you have to keep updating it every time you have some kind of new product. But it can only allow known good software based on a hash value or the code signature or just the name of the file. And those are techniques that are available. Removable media used to have auto runs when you put in a CD or USB stick. That hasn't been true since XP Service Pack 1 or 2. They had to turn off all the automatic running stuff because it was too easy for bad guys to use it to infect systems. And of course, there's full disk encryption now available on every modern operating system. And one thing about disk encryption is it only is really for endpoints, because it only protects systems when they're turned off. If they're up and running and getting attacked, then of course the encryption has been bypassed. So it doesn't really accomplish anything to put it on a server that's up all the time. Honeypots are systems you add to try to attract attackers and make them waste time on that. And it's possible that you might have a legal issue of entrapment, although I've never seen that happen. It seemed to me like I've known many people read many cases of people getting prosecuted for hacking in what certainly seemed like entrapment. It does not seem to be an effective defense in court. And there are honey nets where you set up a whole network of such devices. And there's Think Canary that will sell you special devices just to put on your network to detect when you're being hacked and let you know. So to manage your assets, one important thing is configuration management. You should have a standard hardening for laptops and servers and routers and everything else. And you capture a baseline and make sure that every device is not just plugged in its default state, but is hardened. Change all the passwords, turn off the features you don't need, update the firmware, and so on. Patch management is a similar issue. If Microsoft puts out patches, you can't just put it on systems because, as we all know, they're often defective and cause problems. So you have to have some process of testing the patch and then some process of deploying it after you've decided that it's really worth your time to deploy that patch. Vulnerability scanning is another thing to be done on a regular or continuous basis, so you know if somebody brings in an insecure system and plugs it into your network or installs insecure software or so on. Of course, you can only find the known vulnerabilities. 0 days are the weaknesses that no one knows about yet, so they're not going to be found by any scanner. Change management is the control of what alterations are made in your network. So if somebody wants to add more devices or change software, they can't just do it. They have to ask for permission, and then a change control board has to consider whether it's really a good idea and then roll it out in a correct way so that the technical staff and everybody is informed about the change, and you're checked and it verifies that the change in fact is beneficial and does not cause dangerous problems on the side. So you have quite a job here. You have to notify people, implement the change, and then report results, because you learned the hard way that doing some innocent change, like just updating to the next version of an operating system, is very likely to cause all kinds of problems that are not immediately obvious. So you can't just do it. You have to carefully consider what you're doing, carefully monitor what you're doing, and you have to have a rollback strategy in case it fails, because it often does fail. So we're up to 7B. All right. All right. Looks like we gained a few more people. There may be more than 6 Cahooters now. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, I guess this is it. All right, which defense prevents personally identifiable information from leaving? Data loss prevention is what's watching that sort of thing. All right, what defense correlates data from many sources? That's SIMs, like Splunk, that have a lot of data coming in. What system blocks all unrecognized software? whitelisting. All right, what defense compares traffic to a baseline of normal activity? That's anomaly detection. All right. So Erica, okay. And Dude Man again. And Phil again. Good. All right. Good. All right, let's go on some more of this. So continuity of operations is your plan to keep going through an incident. So service level agreement determines what is an acceptable performance, response time, uptime, and so on. Fault tolerance is a system that can survive a fault. Everything has failures of some, everything has faults, which means some device breaks. Your hard drive goes down, a server goes down, but it's only a failure if users stop receiving service. So a fault tolerant system has redundant systems, like you have a cluster of 3 servers. So if one server goes down, that's a fault, but it's not a failure because the 2 remaining servers continue to provide service to clients. So backup is one of the many restoration techniques. A full backup is the simplest, where you make a full copy of a whole hard drive. Incremental backup is where you back up the data that changed since the last backup, and it might take several tapes to recover because you might back everything up on Friday and then have Monday only the changes on Monday and Tuesday only the changes on Tuesday, and so on. A differential backup is in between the two, where it might take 2 tapes to recover. You can have a RAID disk, which does not substitute for backups. Backups are stored offsite, and they're useful if, say, the whole building burns down. RAIDs are high availability solutions. They are not fault tolerant solutions in the same sense. They do provide some fault tolerance, however. If you have a striped set, it's just high performance, but not fault tolerance. But all the rest of them include extra copies of data. So if one disk fails, you can still recover the data. And that's the various levels here. So mirroring is an entire second copy of all the data. Striping is smearing the data across many disks to make it faster, but parity makes it fault tolerant because it saves an extra copy of data, an extra stripe after every several other stripes, so you could recover from a single disk failure. And if you get a RAID 6, you can even recover from 2 disk failures. All right. Then you can have the complicated ones like RAID 10, where you have a set of mirrors, a set of stripes, and then another copy of the whole set of stripes. So you have redundancy and high speed. All right. So redundancy is just an extra for when things fail, like extra power supplies, extra network cards. You can have high availability clusters of 2 types. The failover cluster has extra systems running that are not used until the first one fails. A load balancing cluster uses them both all the time. So when one fails, your service quality goes down, but when they're both running, you're responding more quickly to customer requests. All right. Then there's business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. The business continuity planning is the general overall scheme of how you're going to continue to do business even when bad things happen of various kinds, disasters. And part of the business continuity plan is the disaster recovery plan, which focuses on one limited disaster. That's a tactical short-term plan to deal with one specific problem, like a outbreak of disease, like what we're living through now, or a fire, or the death of an important person in your company, something like that. So your business continuity plan is the whole shebang to keep your business going even through all the bad things that might happen. And then you have a whole series of little plans. The disaster recovery plan is here. Then you have business resumption plan, a communications plan, a plan to keep the people safe, occupant emergency plan, a co-op plan, continuity of operations for the IT systems to make sure they continue to function. Incident response here we've talked about to deal with all the little problems and security incidents, and then a continuity of support plan. So that's how it all fits together. One important concept is the maximum tolerable downtime, when you're planning, you decide how long could you live without something. If you're an internet company, you probably cannot survive very long without your website, so that's high priority. Whereas billing customers, you could probably let that go off for a few days or month and it wouldn't be so bad, so you can make decisions. So you can sort disasters by cause. There's human and environmental. Human disasters like war and terrorism, network attacks and so on, or errors made by your own staff, and then environmental problems like power failures and earthquakes and floods. There are many, many things that could happen. Errors and omissions is the most common one, though. Far more common than having an external disaster like a fire or a hack from someone outside. The most common problem is your own staff makes a mistake. That's the most common thing. All right. Temperature and humidity is another issue. If you don't keep your servers in the environment with the correct humidity and the correct temperature, then they fail more often. You have to have backup power and uninterruptible power supply or generators to fill in power when your power fails. Then there's all the warfare, personnel shortages, and things like strikes or pandemics. These are all the things that might happen. You may lose communications. The telephone network might go down, the internet might go down. These are all things that tend to happen. So you have a recovery process. You respond to the disaster, you activate your team, you assess the situation, and then you reconstitute functionality. So this is a quick assessment of damage to decide if it is a disaster, and simple questions like, can we continue to work in this building, or is the building going to fall down? Then you activate your team and communicate with people, which might be difficult if the phone lines are down. And then you assess the extent of the damage and decide what the proper steps are. Try to protect your people and move to an alternate location or whatever you have to do. And then you recover everything and try to get everything back to the way it was before the disaster. All right, so I got some cahoots about that, which is C here. Oh. All right, I think 6 is all we're getting. All right, so what kind of disk array lacks fault tolerance? That's grade 0. It increases speed, but you do not have fault tolerance. What kind of backup takes more than 2 tapes to recover? That's the incremental one. All right, what kind of server cluster uses all the servers all the time? Okay, that's load balancing. And what plan deals with something like a fire? That's a disaster recovery plan. All right. So I've got JZ, looks like initials. And I can see who that is. I see you're giving a talk. And Erica again, good. And Phil again, good. All right. Yep, I see that. Shi Liang, good. All right. Well, we'll do one more of these today, I think. And leave the next one, the last one for next time. So, developing your business continuity plan and your disaster recovery plan, there's quite a few stages. You decide you're going to develop such a plan, then you set the scope, which is what part of the business it protects. Then you have to do a business impact analysis to decide how important all the parts of the business are, and therefore what parts should be focused on recovering fast first. Then you determine controls to limit the damage done by disaster, have a strategy for recovery, you design your plan, then you implement, train your staff, and test your plan, and then you have to periodically revisit and maintain and update your plan because everything changes. Your company changes, your priorities change, the environment around you changes, and so on. So there's a few other lists that are essentially the same thing. And here's a chart showing it all. You make a policy statement, conduct the business impact analysis, identify controls, and create plans. And then you develop the plan, train your staff, and maintain the plan. And here it has a list of which people are involved in all these stages. So you have to have management support. You can't do any of this without C-level support, the CEO, CTO, CSO, because you have to spend real money and company resources to develop and maintain this plan. This is a big deal. I've mentioned before in all the CISSP training and testing, don't bother to do any security initiative without top-level support. It is the very common mistake that low-level employees at companies try to improve the security of the company, and the first thing you must do is sell this to top management. If you don't have a champion at a high level of management who is supporting your activities, you will fail because it costs money, and it doesn't matter how much you're frustrated and you think something has to be fixed. If you can't convince management to care, forget it. You're wasting your time. By the way, even if you don't have a disaster occur, it will probably improve your company efficiency. And this I've certainly seen in the real world a lot. Just meeting a compliance level greatly improves your company, even if you don't get hacked. So anyway, you have a manager, your project manager to create your business continuity plan is the key point of contact to make sure this gets done. And their main skill is negotiation and contacts at a high level. They do not have to be very technical. They can have technicians below them, but they have to have the management push to get things to move and to get resources dedicated to this activity. So they have to work with people and keep everyone on board with their plan. It's actually a sort of political role. It's not a technical role to be a project manager as much as a political role. So you have to build a team. You create a continuity planning project team with stakeholders from everybody because you have to consider how you're affecting all parts of the business. And then you decide what assets to protect and what emergency events to deal with and plan what resources you need. Then you determine what IT assets are critical, which ones have to be recovered quickly, which ones can be put off till later. The business impact analysis is more of the same, determining how important and how urgent recovery at each part of the company is. And so you'll have something like this, the risk assessment. If the server room is unlocked, then here's the vulnerability. People might go in there, and that might cause you to lose confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the mitigation is to install better locks with pins and alarms. If your software is out of date, there's a vulnerability, and updating software is to fix. If there's no firewall, then one option here, which is kind of funny because I think it's wrong, is to move server to managed hosting. Most managed hosting, it depends. You have to consider your managed hosting service level agreement to see if they actually protect your stuff. They probably at least do add a firewall though, so they're probably right about that much. Anyway, so maximum tolerable downtime is how long you can tolerate something not working. Now there are several time measures here. Recovery point objective is how much data you're going to recover. You have some kind of disaster like a server crashes, and then some of the data is lost forever, but whatever data you backed up is not lost forever. So your periodic frequency of backup determines your recovery point objective. Now the recovery time objective is just how long it takes you to perform the recovery operation. And the work and the work recovery time is the time it takes to reconfigure the system, because even after you have restored it from backup, there may be other adjustments required. So anyway, the maximum tolerable downtime must not be greater than the sum of these two times, or your plan is not succeeding. You will end up having more than the tolerable amount of downtime when recovering from a disaster. There's also the mean time between failures, which is an estimate made by people who manufacture systems. It's notoriously inaccurate, but they try to tell you how long you can expect this system to run before it breaks. And then there's the time to repair and so on, and requirements for systems for things like servers and hard drives that have to be considered. And supply chain is turning out to be a huge deal in this coronavirus crisis. People can't do the testing because they don't have the swabs and the reagents and so on, and the protective equipment for the workers. It turns out that what you might think is a simple job is a very difficult job, because you can't get all the little pieces you need, especially now that there's a huge problem in trading with China. So considering your supply chain is a huge issue. And in the world of security, over the last several years, many people have been getting very worried about the vulnerabilities from your supply chain. People can attack you by poisoning the software libraries you use or the hardware you use, and that is extremely difficult to deal with. From a US military point of view, they would like to tell you to only use equipment made in the USA and software written in the USA, but that is impossible in practice. So you're actually using stuff made by a nation you don't trust to build your military systems, and that is a difficult place to be. So your communications may fail during a disaster, so you might have to use wireless networks or satellite phones or something like that. You might have to have your own facilities for power, heating, cooling, and water in case the normal utilities are out. And so there's general levels of recovery. If you have no planning at all, then you have no cost, but you have no real availability in case of a disaster. If you spend a little more money, you can have a cold site, more for a warm, hot, or redundant site. This is the most expensive and the most performance when you need it. So a redundant site is where you have a second server ready to go. This is what Google has. Google has multiple locations. Google and Cloudflare have multiple locations all over the world, and each one of them has all the data. So when one goes down, the traffic immediately reroutes to another, and customers continue to get good service. That is the most expensive, but it means that you have no downtime at all. A hot site means you have the equipment ready, but it might take some time to load the latest data. A warm site has something like the old version of equipment that you replaced, so it's okay, but it's not exactly the same. And a cold site means you've got a location, but it's going to take weeks to bring it up because you have to install stuff. So those are the levels. You can have a reciprocal agreement with another company where you agree to let them use your systems, and they will let you use their systems for a while in case of a disaster. And that's one way to get a version of these sites without having to pay as much for it. You can have mobile sites. AT&T has these. We went and toured them one year. They have these trucks full of equipment and routers and power supplies and sleeping quarters, and they drive it into a place like a hurricane zone, and they can just go into an vacant lot with a bunch of these trucks, and within a few hours have a complete cell phone switching station, so people get cell phone service there. You can also outsource this stuff with companies like SunGuard, where a third-party company will provide some of these features for you for a price, of course. So here's all these plans that work together, from the occupant emergency plan, the disaster recovery plan, incident response, and these are all part of the business continuity plan. So there's quite a few of these. Continuity of support for IT, and your incident response we talked about, from things like virus infestations. The occupant emergency plan protects the people, and your crisis management plan is available to organize how the people work together. So you have a communications plan and call trees and an emergency operations center and a copy of your vital records offsite. These are all ways to maintain control in the case of an emergency. Back in 9/11, this is why right after 9/11, George Bush and the vice president were physically separated and kept in separate places. And one of them was on an airplane and one of them in an underground bunker to make sure they wouldn't both get killed if the terrorist attack continued and got worse. And you should have succession planning. What do you do if the normal boss is unavailable or injured? Then you should have a clear plan of who takes over. And of course, the military is best at this. They have a very clear plan of who takes over when somebody's unavailable. Companies often neglect it, but the bigger companies have to consider that too. So we're down to D, as far as I'm going tonight. I'll do one more of these Kahoots, and then we got some student presentations. This is 7D. All right. All right. I see Tom Havey made it here. After the student presentations, we can talk about your spunk. There may be other people here from other classes too. We'll get to them pretty soon. All right. All right. The maximum time needed to recover the systems. Recovery time objective. All right. Which one takes an hour? That's a hot site. All right. All right. Which one uses somebody else's stuff? That's a reciprocal agreement. All right. Which plan protects humans? The occupant emergency plan. All right. So 3 for CDH. Okay. And Phil. And Dude Man. All right. So I got those scores. All right. So we got student presentations. So I think we might as well just go right to it. So I have Dante and Jillian are the two that are ready. Are either of you guys ready now, or shall I? Now, Ampero sent me a video. I could play that if you guys want 4 minutes. These are only 4 minutes long. Dante's ready. Okay, then I'm going to stop sharing my desktop and let you share yours. Let me also stop this recording and make that recording separate.